What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast where we can listen to trans and gender non binary voices telling us their story in their voice, reminding us that each of us is not alone. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Not Alone. I'm here with Jess Vachon. This is the first time we're actually having Jess on, so I'm very, very excited. We are going to find out a little bit more about her journey, what took us to where we are today, and what makes Jess tick. So, first, Jess, before we get started, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jess Vachon. I am a native of the state of New Hampshire. For work, I work in information technology, specifically in information security, where I lead security for a software organization out of Massachusetts. But other than that, I am married. I have two adult children, almost three adult children, and three grandchildren. And in my spare time, I'm usually outside hiking, gardening, or riding my motorcycle.
Wow. There's so many questions to start, but let's start from the beginning, Jess. Um, First of all, you put your pronouns on there: she, her. You identify as female. Do you want to explain pronouns, how you choose, how you identify as, and we kind of go from there, and then we can start maybe with your journey from the beginning and where you were.
Sure. In terms of choosing my pronouns, I mean, this is she, her is who I see myself as. I think I always have. So it's nice now to be able to put that out there. And I do that not just so others know who I am, but so others feel comfortable about putting their pronouns out when we're talking. I think still in 2023, we're having a lot of virtual engagements. So it makes it easy, and it also avoids any uncomfortable situations where someone may inadvertently misgender someone else. Um, that's why I use it. That's who I believe I am. And no one's really going to tell me different. So
Okay, so let's start from the beginning, Jess. How what was Jess's journey? How did you discover uh, that Jess may exist in your life?
yeah, a great question. For me, it happened relatively early on, and without going into details, my early childhood wasn't well supervised, and I don't think any of the kids I grew up with, our childhoods were really well supervised. We were, Gen X kind of shoved out the door, go do your thing. Um, I didn't, obviously, as young kids, you don't really understand genders, and you don't understand physical differences uh, between what is traditionally known as, the binary spectrum of boys and girls. Um, probably until about 8, I didn't have any thoughts on gender at all. But at about 8 or 9 years old, as I recall it, there was a time which, I think kids of that age are starting to discover that there's differences. There's boy, girl, and as you explore those differences, all of a sudden you realize there's physical differences um, that can be apparent. And my first time seeing that there was a different physical appearance than mine, what immediately came out of my mouth was, "I think I'm wrong. I think I'm supposed to look like you." Not understanding what context that is, right? Just knowing at that moment that inside I felt like there was something wrong. I just knew it. Move on a few years,
Actually, do you mind if we explore that moment when you
sure.
knew something was off? So first of all, who did you know it with?
It was another kid in the neighborhood. It was a girl, and that's where I discovered the difference. I think at the same time that she was discovering there's a difference as well. Um, I remember it to this day that it was like a light went on, or a spark in my head that said, "Oh, you've discovered something about yourself." And that stuck. From that moment on, it stuck. And I started to think, as I was getting older, am I not who I'm supposed to be? and realized I think once you have that moment, you start to think about how you're going through your life.
So, so let me ask you about that moment because it was such a germane moment to make Jess who she is. So you realized it was off. It was like that light bulb moment. Did you verbalize it, or was it more of a? It was just in your head.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how I would have verbalized it. I don't know who I would have told. It was just something that to me, I just knew. I just knew. Um, and yeah, I think, I don't know. I suspect when I look back, because that was a long time ago for me,
Right.
that, there were societal factors that were in play there too, that were somehow influencing me, but I didn't understand how they were influencing me.
So she didn't know that you had this pivotal moment that just happened. There's this light that went off in your head, and you kind of went, "Wait a second, something's off." Um, okay, so this happened. Did you? I mean, you were 8 or 9 years old. This was like for me as an 8 or 9 year old, I don't know what's going on. Gender is a new concept. Sexuality is a new concept. Did you go talk to your parents? Did you talk to anyone? Or
No, no, I didn't talk to anyone. And I don't have an explanation for why I didn't talk to anyone.
I don't need an explanation. It's
Yeah,
just
no, I
reality.
mean, I've thought about it several times, like, why didn't I do something? But I think, again, this was the '70s, and there was no internet, we lived in a small rural neighborhood. It wasn't like I was having interactions with a lot of different people or even being exposed to a lot of media. I mean, we had TV antennas. We were lucky if we had 2 TV stations. So, and if you could even watch them through the snow that was on the TV. I mean, so there wasn't any information for
Yeah.
us to interpret anything that we were experiencing.
So uh, you said you grew up in a small rural town. I'm gonna go with, and I don't mean this necessarily politically. I just mean even socially. I would say it's more of a conservative town. Is that a fair description of the town?
That's a fair assessment. And then I would
Okay.
also add that my family, my parents were divorced, so I lived with my mother. My mother's family was
Mm-hmm.
a family of all nuns and priests. So a
That
very
can't help.
Catholic family. So, yeah, it was very traditional Catholic, French Canadian Catholic family. So that's how my early life started in that environment. And I mean, it was not unusual for me to be having regular conversations with a nun or a priest because I was related to them and they were around me all the time. So,
So I have to imagine that can be both confusing and enlightening at the same time. And what I mean by that is, I'm an 8 year old. I'm just visualizing myself in this role, right? I'm an 8 year old. I'm confused about what's going on. Um, I'm pretty sure about what I want, but I'm confused about how that works with everything else I see. I'm not Catholic. I'm not Christian in any way, but I've always thought that that's when you reach out to a nun or a priest, and they can help guide your thought processes a little bit. They can help go, it's okay or it's not okay, and here's what you need. Like I keep hearing this whole Hail Marys thing, so I have no idea how this actually works, but to the extent it does, do, did you did you feel like you had that opportunity to talk to family members and go, what does this mean? Am I wrong? Or did you kind of go, I'm kind of sure who I am. I don't need clarification.
yet another very good question. I don't think I felt comfortable enough around any of my family to have a conversation like that. I think I've just, filed it in the back of my mind. Okay, I know this about myself. We'll kind of go with it. I mean, you're 8 or 9 years old, so I
Right,
don't
right.
there's not a lot of processing because I think in the next moment you're thinking about going to play kickball or do something else. So, um, I think as we go through our lives, there's those moments that just stick, and
Yeah.
you go, "Aha, this is something I is that it's gonna make part of me." You don't have the skills or the wisdom to be able to interpret it like that until you get older. Um, but yeah, certainly I didn't feel like there was anyone in my family I could go to and talk to. It was very rigid. This is how life is. This is how you live, and don't complain.
Um, you described your childhood as not well supervised, and you talked about your mom was divorced in the 70s, which would be an unusual time to be divorced.
Absolutely.
And you grew up around priests and nuns who, again, my experience being limited, but it suggests that it would be a slightly less accepting part of a woman being divorced. How did your mom's um and I don't know the story obviously associated with your mom, but was there an element of my mom became who she had to become, so I have the right to become who I have to, or how does that play together?
I'd never thought about that until you said that. I could tell you that my mom had no choice but to be a very um, forceful woman because, as you mentioned, in the 70s, a divorced woman was you know, like a very rare thing, or if not rare, it was something that wasn't discussed. Certainly, the family, there was a feeling of, well, she should have done something better to maintain her marriage. Although she had no responsibility in what led to that divorce whatsoever. But she had to get out, and she had 3 kids to raise, right? So she had to go find some work. She started as a part-time secretary for a law firm at night, and then moved to a part-time teller position, then a full-time teller position, and over the years moved up to be a vice president of a bank, and was constantly fighting for her rights as a woman in the workplace. I remember in particular the organization, National Organization of Women, um, was very, I think it had just started to come onto the scene in the 70s, and she was a member of that group. And at one point, when she was going to be denied an opportunity for promotion, she used that group to fight for her rights to get that promotion that she was due, that she had earned. So, you know, thinking about that and thinking about your question, yes, maybe that had a lot of influence on me. I know certainly outside of who I am, um, as a woman, for everything else I've done in my life, I have looked at her example of having to be a fighter and having to be persistent to get myself to where I wanted to be. From a poor kid in a rural neighborhood with a single parent to being successful and having a nice family and having a house and everything. Those were certainly goals that I looked at and said, that's what I'm going to do. And she was my example for that.
So I'm going to flip that question slightly differently as well. You talked very um, pleasantly about, I don't know, I couldn't think of a good word, but pleasantly about your mom, and you talk about how she's been this guiding force in your life. You haven't mentioned your dad, and I don't know what your relationship with your dad is, but was any element of being who Jess is a rejection of your father?
Yes, there were certain. So my mother has passed. My father is still alive and actually lives in the same town I live in, and I do have regular breakfasts with him, and he is accepting of me. Um, but yes, I had a lot of anger about him when I was younger. Certainly for the reasons of my parents' divorce, and then he disappeared for a good majority of my early childhood. uh, he just wasn't around, and no one knew where he was. But there were certainly aspects of his personality that I rejected, and not only rejected in myself, but it turned me off in other people when I would see those same things obviously, there was some trauma associated with that, from my early childhood, um, but yes, most people, if I'm talking about my parents, will hear me talk about my mother quite a bit more than my father. I certainly have a lot of pride and love and admiration for my mother and what she did. Not to say I don't respect my father. We've over the years have figured out a way to reconcile, which was really just me saying, it's not worth holding on to all of this stuff, because life's too short. And I did want to know my dad as an adult.
Sure. Um, it, it, it my parents are together, so I can only speak to it as an experience I didn't have, but I'm comparing it. And please, this sounds a little bit like that scene from Goodwill Hunting, where Robin Williams tells the Matt Damon character, "Do you think I understand the first thing of what you went through? Because I read David Copperfield." And that's why I apologize if these questions seem naive or seem silly.
No, they're
Uh,
fine.
but what about your father as you were discovering Jess? Did you reject? Was it masculinity, or was it certain behaviors? Was it expression? Or was it stoicness? Like, what was it that you kind of went, no, if I'm gonna model my life, my mom is my guiding path.
Yeah, I think my father has had a history of having issues with honesty, um, and loyalty, um, and manipulation. Not so much now, but most certainly when he was in his 20s, 30s, 40s. Um, that was a good part of how he worked his way through life. There were times growing up where I think he suspected that I wasn't as masculine as he wanted me to be, although I did everything possible to try and be as masculine as people would want me to be. Um, and that sometimes worked into situations that were not pleasant for me, because I think again, 70s and 80s, some fathers, if they saw a feminine side to their to who they perceived as a son, that they wanted to rectify that situation. They wanted to work that out. Um, and there were many times when that came out as either violence against me or situations I was put in, that I wasn't socially ready for. Um, one incident was being taken to a strip club. Um, and I definitely think that incident was an effort to masculinize me, maybe more masculine. There we go.
There you
Um,
go. There you go.
but
Um,
which again was
we'll get that in a second.
which was confusing to me because I thought I was putting on a good act.
Okay. So we're now at this age of you being about 8, you being around 9 years old. This light bulb's gone off, and you're looking at this neighborhood girl, going, "Wait a second, why? This is wrong." That all you know is this is wrong. Did you know what the this was? Was this the body? Was this the dressing? Was this the behavior? What was wrong at that moment?
It was the body.
Okay.
I said I don't think I'm supposed to have a penis.
Okay.
Um, it wasn't so much the clothes, although I would say later in my life became a more prominent aspect for me. And then I think now it's a lot less about that. Now it's about how I feel as a person.
So so you knew that your body didn't conform. Um and you were, in your own description, an effeminate child. At least your father thought so.
My
You
father,
didn't, obviously.
and I think, and honestly, I think there were other males around me during that time who also thought that. Um, in my recollection, I don't know what I was doing that came across like that. But, maybe when you're that young, you are less guarded and you're
Yeah.
feeling just like being who you are. You haven't quite grasped that whole peer pressure conformity thing. You're still kind of just, I'm just a kid. I'm just a
Right.
kid. I'm just being myself. But I think, adults certainly have more experience in life at that point, and they're looking and saying, "Oh, this is an effeminate child. Like this child has to be fixed." Even though to me, I had no, I couldn't see that. I didn't feel it. I just was being me.
I find that interesting though, because a lot of people I've spoken to suggest that they knew that they were off and they tried to overcorrect. What you're describing is this level of comfort with yourself, and you didn't try to overcorrect. Though I find that slightly difficult to reconcile with the idea that you thought you came across as masculine. So how do you reconcile you were described as effeminate, you saw yourself as masculine, but you knew that there was a something was off?
Yeah, I don't know perspective. Like I said, I don't know. When we get to my teenage years, it goes exactly the opposite direction. Like I am doing everything possible to put off that I am masculine so that I am safe. Like when I started going through puberty, I know that the wrong puberty is happening and that there's nothing I can do about it. And I have to fake it to make it because if I don't, I'm going to end up hurt or dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't have any way to explain that period from, 8 or 9 until puberty. I don't know. I mean, maybe because I didn't have my father around, I thought I was masculine, but I didn't have those things that I was picking up from him.
Yeah.
So,
Um you describe your family being, I mean, I'm visualizing what your life in the 70s could have been like, right? So I'm thinking you have a single mom. You don't have a male figure, so it's not like your dad's coming in and you're seeing a masculine figure in your house. You describe being surrounded by nuns and priests, but I'm visualizing a lot of. If I was a woman, I'd probably have a lot of female friends or female family members visit, which means that you're surrounded by a lot of women. So comparatively, was masculinity a comparative term as opposed to a experiential term, if that's a word?
yeah, yeah, my mom definitely had a lot of female friends that were around quite often. She did date, but
Right.
depending on how myself and my brothers liked the individual, they were either around for a while or they weren't. More often than not, they weren't because we made a point of running them off.
Oh my
Um,
God. Okay. Well, that's a whole different discussion we got to talk about.
it was a concerted effort that we actually would discuss. Do we like this person? If we didn't, we did everything possible to run them off, make it their life miserable. But um, yeah, certainly we're definitely more. There was much more of a female presence around me when I was younger.
What I just discovered though in what you just said was you had brothers.
Mhm.
So did you see yourself as one of the brothers, or did you see yourself as off, if you will?
Um, I knew, yeah, I guess that's hard to answer
Yeah.
um, because I think, I was in this box at that point that I was one of the brothers, but I didn't see myself as a male. I saw myself just as a person.
Right.
Um, and because my mom was working, there was this weird aspect that I was also like somewhat of a parent because I had to raise the other two at the same time I was their sibling. So
So they were younger than you.
yes, both of them are younger than me.
So they looked up to you. Did you feel like you had to model masculinity for them only because you were the older sibling? You did not worry about that.
No,
Okay.
No.
Okay, okay. So your mom, you modeled them to be whoever they thought was appropriate at that time. Which is kind of awesome, right? When you think about it, that's a very, very progressive thought process, especially in the 70s. Be who you are, be happy with who you are. The 70s were, generally speaking, a more regimented gender roles time period. So it possibly took a little bit. Now, obviously, we've discussed that your dad wasn't in the picture as much at that time. So how? And we're kind of running out of time here for a second. So I'm going to ask one last question before we come back, if you'll indulge us and come back again. But
Sure.
how? What was there a period from now till puberty when your mom discovered that her son is actually her daughter?
She was very intelligent. I think if she suspected it, um, she never spoke of it, at least not to me. I don't know if she spoke of it to her friends. Um, being her firstborn, I think there's always that special relationship with the firstborn. Um, unfortunately, she passed when I was only 23, so we
Wow.
never got to have a conversation about it. I never really got to know her as an adult and have those conversations like I can have with my dad, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so so I don't know. I know she never pushed me in any different direction. She just let me go in my own direction, and as far as I knew, I was pulling off faking being a really masculine male. Um, but she knew me very well. She probably knew better.
Sorry, I thought that was going to be the last question. I'm going to ask one more. Because to me, this sort of closes off this chapter, uh, which I find never does, but still. Do you feel like if you had better models, you would have turned out differently, or you were always who you were? And it's, I guess I'm asking nature versus nurture is really what I'm really asking. Was nature always going to override anything nurture did here?
Yes, it was always going to be nature. I tried to fight it for decades. Look,
Yeah.
when you're transgender, you're transgender. That's just who you are. It's just the way you develop. Um, does the environment affect it? I think minimally, really. For me, what affected it environmentally is when the laws started changing so that I didn't have to be as scared, right?
Mm,
Which wasn't until, you know, 5, 10 years ago.
right.
Um,
Right.
but I've known from that moment when I was 8 or 9, I have known. And it wasn't it doesn't matter what anyone tried to do to me or how society wanted me to be. Eventually, I was going to be me.
Yeah. Jess, before we go, how can people reach you if they have questions?
They can reach me on Twitter at infosec_Jess. That's probably the best way to reach me. I am on LinkedIn, so if you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can reach me there. But I'm always willing to talk to anyone, and I love meeting new people.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on, Jess.
Thank you for having me. Great questions. I enjoyed it.